what we did with evaluative learning and then what we learned, because this project was very early in terms of the shared measurement ideology that's going through philanthropy now. And we've learned a lot from it, some of it not so good, and some of it really, really good. So what I'm going to do is talk really quickly through this sheet, which talks about what the project was. It started in 2006. It was a partnership between Piper and United Way with 8 after-school organizations. And the idea was that we would do 3 steps. One would be providing the organizations technology so that they can really easily capture data and understand that data and analyze that data. Step 2 would be creating this shared measurement tool, this common outcome piece. And then step 3 is the peer group learning. And the idea would be that once they got the results from the shared outcome tool, they would all be able to get together and talk about, well, I'm not so good at this, but you're really good at this, and how can we, as a group, improve outcomes and quality together? That didn't happen quite that way. It never does, exactly, and things kind of started becoming more difficult with that shared measurement piece. So that's really what I want to talk about. Like what they were saying with Project SAM, this process of going through with a group of 8 organizations who in our mind, hey, you are all after-school organizations, you must be doing similar things. Well, no, in their minds, they're all very, very, very different. And what's very important to them is what makes them different from each other. So that conversation of finding commonalities took months, months and months. And actually, my first meeting on this project, we had our outside consultant coming in, and they were talking about individual questions on surveys and whether or not they could agree on them. It was painful. But they did eventually land on 4 outcomes, and these were all short-term outcomes because we didn't want it to be things like, for example, decreasing teenage pregnancy. Well, if you're working with elementary school students, that's not really the that we're thinking about. So what they agreed on in the end was increased self-efficacy, increased academic motivation, and just wanting to be in school and enjoying school and understanding the importance of attending school, decision-making and goal-setting, and then interpersonal communication skills. And then on top of those 4, the 5th thing that we wanted to measure was program quality. We were very lucky to be working with the TCC group, and they came up with different tools to match each of these different outcomes and the program quality piece that were both free, which was very nice, and also reliable and valid. So that was really great. And eventually we got each of the organizations to start collecting data on every single one of their kids, which is incredible. At that point, we gave each organization a nice report. It was color-coded. Things that you're doing really well on, those were green. Things that you weren't doing really well on, those were red. So we thought, hey, pretty obvious what's going on here. But that's when we learned quite a bit at that moment, because we met with each organization one-on-one to go through their report, and they would say, well, what does this mean? And we realized at that point that these 8 after-school organizations were collecting a ton of data, and that they had a really hard time knowing what does it all mean. And that we were working on the assumption that they don't know what to do with data, they don't have data. Well, that's not the case. And so what we did was bring in another external consultant to work with each individual organization and say, what are your long-term goals? What do you really think your program is achieving? What are you already measuring that's meeting those goals? And try to pare it all down. Okay, so that was the group on the whole, what happened. At the end, we were hoping everyone would come back together and say, wow, we've learned a lot, let's get together as a sector. That didn't occur, unfortunately. It just didn't occur. And part of that was when the economy went downhill, these groups were very open with us, and they said, we just can't focus on this at this time. We just can't do it. So the big learnings, what I want to share with you, because I think that this kind of project, no matter where you're funding and what sector or what size, you can embark on similar projects. And there's things that you can learn from projects like CDP, like Project SAM, like evaluative learning. With the shared measurement tool, we found that even though every single organization said these outcomes are important to us, that doesn't necessarily mean they were measuring things that were key to their mission. So we had to let go of some pieces. For example, healthy choices. If not all 8 organizations said, yes, we want to talk about healthy choices, then it wasn't a part of the tool. Another one was drug prevention, not a part of the tool. So when you look at the 4 outcomes we ended up with, unfortunately, what we missed was by tapering out all of those other pieces, it was no longer really central to their mission. So at that point, they're collecting more data, but it doesn't mean much to them. And it's really important that when you're talking about shared measurement tools, you don't lose sight of the fact that at the end of the day, your tool needs to be giving them information that they really, really need, not just collecting more data. That shared measurement tools work best with situations that already have some common language and common outcomes. And I think an example of that would be like with CDP, we know what financial stability looks like. We know what outcomes you need to be measuring if you're interested in making a more financially stable organization. But when it comes to after-school organizations, those outcomes, each organization has different ideas about what's most important to them. A lot of what Piper's focusing on now with after-school is quality, and that is partly because quality is an arena in which there's understood outcomes already there. The sector has already agreed on what quality looks like. So I think that was a really key piece, that we thought that we could work through this and we thought that we could find those common outcomes, but it ended up actually diluting the quality of the data. I talked a bit about how much nonprofits are already collecting information. I think part of another big learning for us was the power differential between what it is to be a funder and what it is to be a nonprofit. And we thought that we could invite them to this table and sit around and that we could all be friends and we could say, hey, why don't you guys do this? And they would honestly tell us if they didn't want to do it. But unfortunately, they were doing a lot of things for us and for other funders that wasn't really helpful to them. And I think that when it comes to data, a lot of funders, and Piper's included, they ask nonprofits to collect data, but at the end of the day, it takes those nonprofits away from their ability to really be focusing on their core mission. And so by us being at the table constantly, we were at every single meeting. They didn't have a space where they could say, wait, these 4 outcomes don't matter much to us anymore. Like, we just didn't give them that opportunity to really have that voice because we thought that there could be an openness between us that wasn't real. This morning we had an academy at Piper, and the speaker stood up at the middle and he said, hello, hello, we were taking a break, and he said, gosh, you all paid attention to her when she said it at the beginning, because Ellen had done the introduction, and I heard someone next to us say, well, that's because she has the money. Wow, what a great reminder that we think that we're chummy, but no. Yes, no, it was a good reminder. So what can we do to help alleviate some of this kind of data overload that nonprofits have? And I think that no matter who you are, you can always ask, well, tell me what you're already measuring. Who knows? Maybe they're already doing something that's going to meet every single one of your needs, and you don't need to create a whole new process. I think that's part of what CDP is about. You don't need a separate process if another funder is doing something similar. Make sure organizations can really still clearly state their goals, their mission outside of your funding. Because a nonprofit can come to you and say, we're really excited about doing this and this and this, but that's partly because they need our help, they need our money, and it's nice for us to give them, again, that voice to say, okay, we'll support you in this project, we think this project is really important. Tell us how it fits into your bigger mission. We know this is not all you do. And I think that sometimes when we talk about measurement and when we talk about the amount of data that nonprofits are collecting, it's for this little piece and this little piece and this little piece of their projects. Wouldn't it be nice if we can help them take those pieces and start talking about, as a whole, what is your organization's true mission and true goals, instead of piecemeal data collection? If you noticed, both Project SAM and the Evaluative Learning Project had that technology piece. That piece worked very, very well in evaluative learning. And the ability for those organizations to very quickly collect data, to then use that data to generate fast reports, it was wonderful. So I think that's another thing that funders can learn from this project, is that supporting the process of evaluation is so important. And then also, not only the data collection piece, but the ability to have ongoing data, not just a one-time report, and that's what the technology did. And I think that's one thing that the shared measurement tools can do too, is that you're building that organization's capacity to take a measurement tool and learn from it, and not just get that one-time report. And I want to say one thing about the peer learning group, because like I said, that just never happened with us, and I think it's because we had this assumption that everyone was on the same level when it came to their evaluative capacity, and it turns out that they just weren't, and we thought that if we gave them their red and green reports, they could come together and say, well, I see that you're green where I'm red, tell me what you're doing differently. They just didn't have that level of trust. And it's really important when you're going to start a peer learning group to make sure they can start with something that they're all comfortable talking about. So you don't necessarily need to talk about who's doing what well and who's doing what poorly, but you can talk about something that, like bullying. You know, all after-school organizations are interested in learning about bullying. Or, I don't know, something like that. So I think that's another thing that we learned, that we thought that they could jump in and start just talking about data, and that's just too much to ask. It really was.